Herbert Hoover presents one of American history's most intriguing paradoxes. The man who fed millions during 2 world wars also became a multimillionaire through controversial mining deals. The humanitarian who donated his presidential salary systematically suppressed critics and orchestrated what may be history's largest theft of documentary evidence. The Quaker engineer who preached rugged individualism became a member of the Bohemian Grove's most exclusive camp, participating in elaborate rituals beneath a 40-foot concrete owl. This is not the Herbert Hoover of elementary school textbooks. The real Hoover, mining magnate, accused war profiteer, document thief, and shadow power broker, operated at the intersection of international finance, intelligence networks, and elite secret societies for nearly 70 years. What follows is the documented evidence of his hidden empire, drawn from court records, declassified documents, suppressed books, and archival materials that Hoover himself tried to bury. Before Herbert Hoover became the great humanitarian or the president blamed for the Depression, he was something else entirely. A ruthless international mining capitalist who accumulated $4 to $5 million by age 40, equivalent to $125 million today. This fortune wasn't built on American soil through honest prospecting. It was extracted through operations spanning 4 continents, using methods that would land him in court and spark allegations that followed him for decades. Hoover's empire began in 1897 when he joined the British firm Bewick, Moring and Company. Within 4 years, at age 27, he became a partner, a meteoric rise that came as his reward for orchestrating the single most controversial deal of his career, the takeover of China's Kaiping coal mines during the Boxer Rebellion. A 2018 Harvard thesis by Jessica Carlson provides the most detailed documentation of the scandal. During the chaos of 1900, as foreign powers occupied China and the Boxer Rebellion raged, Hoover negotiated the transfer of the Kaiping mines from Chinese to British ownership. But here's where it gets interesting. The original deed was destroyed and replaced with an antedated version backdated to circumvent U.S. open-door policy prohibitions against territorial seizure during wartime. The transaction was built on deception. A January 17, 1901 deed was created and falsely dated July 30, 1900. The Chinese shareholders who owned the mines received only 37.5% of shares in the new British-registered Chinese Engineering and Mining Company, while 62.5% went to mysterious promotional consideration, essentially to Hoover and his associates. The promised £1 million in new capital never materialized. Instead, the company issued £500,000 in debentures, adding more debt rather than providing investment. When Chinese director Zhang Yi sued in London's courts in 1905, Judge Sir Matthew Ingle Joyce ruled against Hoover and his associates, finding them guilty of deceitful business practices. The court documented how Hoover had seized by violence company funds on May 18, 1901, and used threats and main force to obtain property deeds. Yet despite this legal condemnation, British administrative control remained in London, the largest land transfer from Chinese to foreign ownership in Chinese history. What did Hoover receive for this? A seat on the CEMC board from 1901 to 1912, ownership of 20 to 25,000 shares worth approximately $4 million in today's value, and 10% of all profits from his firm's China ventures. But China was just the beginning. By 1914, Hoover controlled or influenced operations in Western Australia, Burma's Namtu Bodwin silver mine, Russia's Kishtim copper mines, South Africa's labor recruitment, and operations across Mexico, New Zealand, and California. He maintained offices in 6 cities worldwide and employed 175,000 workers. His Burma Corporation and Zinc Corporation, which later became Rio Tinto, now the world's 3rd largest mining company, generated massive profits. The methods were as aggressive as the scope. Hoover opposed minimum wages and workers' compensation, used Italian immigrants to cut costs and counter the labor movement in Australia, and operated at the fringes of some shady deals. Court documents reveal his use of antedated documents, stock manipulation schemes, and power of attorney arrangements that allowed complex asset transfers across jurisdictions. Then came World War I, and Herbert Hoover's transformation from mining magnate to great humanitarian, or was it a transformation at all? The Commission for Relief in Belgium, established in October 1914, stands as one of history's great humanitarian achievements. The organization fed 9 to 11 million people daily in German-occupied Belgium and northern France, shipping 5.7 million tons of food, worth nearly $1 billion. Hoover navigated the British naval blockade and German occupation through a complex system using American neutrality, diplomatic immunity, and unprecedented international cooperation. But here's what the standard histories don't tell you. Hoover claimed he resigned from all mining directorships to devote himself to Belgian relief. Mining industry records tell a different story. According to Skinner's Mining Manual, Hoover served on 13 boards of directors in 1914, 16 in 1915, and 13 in 1916, including serving as a chairman of one and joint manager of both the Burma Corporation and Zinc Corporation. Throughout the war, as he coordinated humanitarian effort, his mining companies reaped immense dividends from unprecedented wartime demand for metals and munitions. The timing of certain business deals raises eyebrows. In December 1917, at the height of CRB operations, Hoover brokered the creation of the Anglo-American Corporation of South Africa, using the CRB's banking connections at J.P. Morgan and Guarantee Trust Company of New York. His partner was Ernest Oppenheimer, who ran the CRB's New York office. Hoover received major shareholdings and options in what instantly became a mining giant. And consider his Russian holdings. Hoover owned interests in the Kishtim Corporation, Russo-Asiatic Corporation, Irtish Corporation, and Atbasar Copperfields. In late 1916, just months before the Russian Revolution would confiscate foreign mining assets, Hoover liquidated all his Russian holdings. Insider knowledge or fortunate timing? The question hangs unanswered in the archives. Then there are the darker allegations documented in sources that Hoover would later try to suppress. Winston Churchill and the British military believed that Belgian relief prolonged the war by freeing Germany from the obligation to feed Belgian civilians, preventing riots behind German lines. In April 1915, British naval intelligence launched a formal investigation of Hoover, examining allegations that he was untrustworthy, had sinister business connections with German mining corporations. Sidney Rowlett conducted the investigation and officially cleared Hoover, but the investigator himself would later become infamous for the repressive Rowlett Act in India. Churchill instigated formal espionage charges against Hoover that were eventually dropped. The Germans, meanwhile, feared that CRB delegates, young Americans who traveled freely through occupied Belgium with diplomatic immunity, might be passing military intelligence to the Allies. Everyone suspected Hoover was playing a double game. The question is, were they right? Now we come to the one secret society membership that's beyond dispute. Herbert Hoover joined the Bohemian Club in 1913 and remained an active member for 51 years until his death in 1964. This wasn't some gentleman's social club. The Bohemian Grove's 2,700-acre compound in Monte Rio, California, has hosted every Republican president since Calvin Coolidge, corporate titans, military leaders, and intelligence chiefs. The Manhattan Project, America's atomic bomb program, was planned at the September 1942 meeting at the Grove Clubhouse, attended by Ernest Lawrence, Robert Oppenheimer, and the presidents of Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, along with representatives from Standard Oil and General Electric. Hoover co-founded the Caveman Camp with fellow Stanford alumni, described as highly conservative, even by Bohemian Club standards. Members included Dwight Eisenhower and Richard Nixon. At that 1950 visit, Nixon met Eisenhower for the first time, a meeting that would shape American politics for 2 decades. But what actually happened at these encampments? Archive photographs show Hoover giving annual lakeside talks, policy speeches delivered to hundreds of America's most powerful men. Then there's the ritual that opens every summer encampment, the cremation of care ceremony. Performed before a 40-foot concrete owl statue at an artificial lake, is this a cult ritual or elaborate theatrical tradition? Multiple infiltrations of the Grove have documented it as more overgrown frat party than dark cabal. Yet the symbolic power of presidents and generals in ritual robes burning effigies before a giant owl while chanting cannot be dismissed. Whatever the ceremony's origins, it represents the willing participation of America's elite in esoteric, symbolic rituals hidden from public view. Notably, Hoover was definitively not a Freemason despite his attendance at Masonic events. Masonic historian Ray Denslow documented that Hoover considered joining, but his assistant advised it would appear as campaign propaganda. Hoover's negative experience with Stanford fraternities, whose members tried to prevent him from dating his future wife, Lou Henry, because she was a sorority girl and he wasn't in a fraternity, created a lasting skepticism of secret hierarchical organizations. He made an exception for Bohemian Grove, where the networking value for business and political connections apparently outweighed his philosophical objections. The relationship between Herbert Hoover and J. Edgar Hoover has spawned decades of confusion. They were not related by blood or family ties, but their connection was more significant than mere kinship could provide. When Attorney General Harlan Fiske Stone sought someone to head the Bureau of Investigation in the early 1920s, he consulted with Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover's assistant, Larry Ritchie, recommended J. Edgar Hoover as a competent rising star. Hoover forwarded this recommendation to Stone, directly facilitating J. Edgar Hoover's appointment as FBI director, a position he would hold for 48 years. The two men became close personal friends, frequently forwarding each other's misdirected mail and joking about public confusion. Correspondence between them from 1935 to 1964 documents a relationship that went far beyond professional courtesy. But Herbert Hoover's most significant intelligence role came after his presidency. He chaired two major commissions that fundamentally shaped the early CIA's organization and oversight. Declassified CIA documents show the agency took these recommendations seriously, sometimes reluctantly. The first commission called for vigorous efforts to improve CIA's internal structure and proposed an evaluation board. The second, featuring the Clark Task Force on Intelligence Activities, examined CIA military intelligence, FBI, and AEC intelligence operations, recommending internal reorganization and the creation of permanent oversight mechanisms. These recommendations led directly to the establishment of the Board of National Estimates for Intelligence Analysis and the Presidential Board of Consultants on Foreign Intelligence Activities in 1956, the precursor to modern intelligence oversight. CIA Director Allen Dulles, while welcoming the inquiry publicly, privately circulated memos about the Commission's potential impact on agency operations. Then there's the Hoover Institution itself, founded in 1919 with Hoover's $50,000 donation. While it began as a collection of World War I documents, it evolved into something far more significant. Today, it houses one of the world's premier collections on intelligence, propaganda, and psychological warfare, including CIA Director William Casey's papers, KGB defector files, tens of thousands of pages from the Lithuanian KGB archives, Soviet Communist Party documents, 12 million pages microfilmed in collaboration with Russian state archives after the USSR's collapse, and extensive psychological warfare materials from World War II and the Cold War. Was this intelligence focus intentional from the beginning, or did it evolve organically? The answer may lie in how the collection was formed, which brings us to one of the most audacious operations in Hoover's career. In April 1919, Stanford history professor Ephraim Adams, Herbert Hoover's close friend from their student days, arrived in Paris with an extraordinary mission. He kept a diary for 1 week, then stopped, claiming the work was too interesting to suffer interruption. His task required immediate speed. Nothing was too unimportant. He was coordinating what critics have called the greatest theft of historical records in modern history. Adams recruited 15 Army history professors and students released from service by General Pershing, but still in uniform. They were sent to countries where the American Relief Administration was feeding populations, food in one hand and reassurance in the other. Their focus, documents about war origins and CRB operations. They made the right contacts and snooped around for archives. Then Hoover recruited approximately 1,000 additional agents. The operation continued for years. In Belgium, access was facilitated by Emile Franqui himself, Hoover's CRB partner and chairman of Société Générale Bank. Who else knew where all the important evidence was buried? Both men had reasons to control the historical record. Hoover faced allegations of war profiteering and food diversion to Germany. Franqui's bank needed to protect its wartime activities that left it cash-rich and thriving beyond its dreams. The method was ingenious. Documents were shipped back to the United States as ballast in the empty food boats that had carried relief supplies to Europe. The destination, Stanford University in California, as distant from the European theater as could be imagined. By 1923, the collection held 40,000 plus items. By 1929, it contained 1.4 million items. Adams stopped creating a catalog, claiming doing so too early led to a disappointment and vexation. Hoover estimated cataloging would take 1,000 years. The collection accelerated to a frenzied pace, but cataloging was delayed indefinitely, meaning researchers couldn't easily access materials to verify or challenge Hoover's version of events. Today, the Hoover Institution holds 6,000 separate collections, 50 million original documents, and 1 million volumes from 171 countries. It's presented as preservation of history. Critics call it the physical removal of evidence from its point of origin to prevent discovery of illegal importations to Germany and malpractices of Belgian bankers and speculators. What was destroyed? What languishes in darker recesses? We may never know. But we do know that when CRB insider Tracy Kittredge wrote A Comprehensive History in 1919, Hoover ordered all copies collected and destroyed, claiming it was inaccurate and unreliable, but never explaining what inaccuracies it contained. Herbert Hoover didn't just collect documents, he systematically suppressed critics. Walter Liggett, an investigative journalist who worked for the New York Times, Post, and Daily News, published The Rise of Herbert Hoover in 1932. The book documented Hoover's mining operations and business practices using extensive research now housed at the New York Public Library. It became the best critical, detailed biography of Herbert Hoover. Hoover's response, a campaign to discredit Liggett, FBI background checks on the author, and a public relations counteroffensive. Herbert Corey wrote The Truth About Herbert Hoover to rebut Liggett's work. 3 years later, on December 1935, Walter Liggett was murdered in a Minneapolis gangland killing, shot down for exposing organized crime and corruption. While not directly related to his Hoover book, it demonstrates the dangerous environment for those who challenge powerful figures. Even more dramatic was the case of John Hamill, who published The Strange Career of Mr. Hoover under two flags, 31. 381-page illustrated book reached its 15th printing with explosive allegations that Hoover renounced U.S. citizenship for British subject status, that Belgian relief was a plot to line his own pockets and aid the German war machine, and detailed accounts of the Boxer Rebellion coal mine scandal. On January 5, 1933, the Cape Girardeau, southeast Missourian, reported that Hamill had been forced to retract his book, admitting his interpretations were in error, but Hamill's court testimony tells a more complex story. He refused to admit his work was entirely false, only that interpretations were in error in some instances. He alleged that Hoover's agent George Barr Baker wrote a 184-page repudiation using strong-arm tactics and thuggery. The pattern is clear. Books removed from shelves, entire editions pulped, FBI background checks on would-be authors, sophisticated PR campaigns, legal threats, and forced retractions. As one historian notes, Hoover used pliant biographers and party hacks to create an authorized narrative while suppressing alternative accounts. Now we reach the question that conspiracy theorists find most compelling. Did Herbert Hoover and international bankers deliberately engineer the Great Depression as a controlled collapse to consolidate wealth and power? The controlled collapse theory, as a named academic framework, appears in fringe publications by authors like Gary Allen and Eustace Mullins, alleging that international bankers orchestrated the crash through Federal Reserve policy, with Montague Norman and Benjamin Strong coordinating manipulation. Federal Reserve policy errors were catastrophic, and Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke later admitted regarding the Great Depression, "We did it. We're very sorry." The Fed allowed a 30% contraction in the money supply and was paralyzed by internal disagreements, but incompetence and adherence to flawed economic orthodoxy better explain these failures than a coordinated conspiracy. Hoover himself warned about speculation since 1925 as Commerce Secretary. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. sold all holdings before October 1929, converted to cash and real estate, then bought assets at Depression bottom prices, building the Kennedy fortune worth $500 million plus. J. Paul Getty called it the opportunity of a lifetime to get oil companies for practically nothing. Most dramatically, the 1932 Pecora hearings exposed widespread insider trading, then legal, stock pool manipulation, tax evasion, and self-dealing. Albert Wiggin, Chase Bank president, made $4 million shorting Chase stock using insider knowledge. Charles Mitchell of National City paid no taxes on $1 million in income through creative schemes. His philosophy of rugged individualism held that government aid created dependency and destroyed character. He believed voluntary cooperation superior to coercion, and worried that direct federal relief was unconstitutional. He eventually relented, creating the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in January 1932 with $2 billion in lending authority, but too late to prevent massive suffering. The truth is less dramatic but more tragic than conspiracy. Intelligent, well-meaning leaders made catastrophic errors based on prevailing but incorrect economic theory, combined with Hoover's ideological rigidity and institutional dysfunction. Countries that abandoned the gold standard earlier recovered faster. Hoover's adherence to orthodoxy, his signing of the Smoot-Hawley tariff, and his 1932 tax increases to balance the budget all worsened the Depression. After his 1932 defeat, Hoover might have faded into obscurity. Instead, he engineered one of American history's most remarkable rehabilitations, transforming from the most hated president into a respected elder statesman, while maintaining connections to elite power structures for 31 more years. From 1933 to 1945, Franklin Roosevelt froze Hoover out completely, even refusing to allow him any public role during World War II, despite his unmatched relief experience. But Hoover used these wilderness years strategically. He published The Challenge to Liberty, attacking the New Deal as fascistic, maintained his Bohemian Grove and Council on Foreign Relations connections, and positioned himself as a leader of conservative Republican opposition. His rehabilitation came through an unlikely friendship. Harry Truman, the Democrat who replaced Roosevelt, developed a deep personal bond with Hoover. In 1946, Truman appointed Hoover to lead post-World War II famine relief, and Hoover traveled to 38 countries in 3 months, covering 50,000 miles. He helped establish UNICEF and CARE, fed millions through the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, and once again became the great humanitarian. Then came the Hoover Commissions. The first submitted 19 reports with 273 recommendations. Over 70% were implemented, leading to the creation of the Department of Health, Education and Welfare, the General Services Administration, strengthening of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and more. His elite organization memberships provided ongoing access. Council on Foreign Relations records document speeches in 1938 and 1947. At Bohemian Grove, his lakeside talks continued, with Nixon later describing them as highlights of the Grove experience. In 1953, at age 79, Hoover received Old Guard status, reserved for those with 40-plus years membership, comparing the honor to his frequent role as veteran counselor to later presidents. The pattern reveals ongoing engagement with elite power structures while maintaining public respectability. Kennedy's Defense Secretary Robert McNamara thanked him for ideas that could save billions in Pentagon spending. Even at age 86, Hoover traveled 14,000 miles and delivered 20 speeches in a single year. During these 3 decades, Hoover published more than 40 books, including his memoirs, Freedom Betrayed, his secret history of World War II kept confidential for almost 50 years, and the 8-volume Addresses Upon the American Road, spanning his entire post-presidency. He maintained extensive correspondence with J. Edgar Hoover, U. Averell Harriman, John D. Rockefeller, and other power brokers. Was this shadow governance? The term overstates his actual power. It was largely frozen out from 1933 to 1945 and served more as a counselor than controller from 1945 to 1964. But he maintained extraordinary influence for someone without an official position, provided continuity across administrations, and remained embedded in elite networks that connected business, intelligence, and political power. So what do we make of Herbert Hoover? The evidence resists simple categorization.